Thanks for joining us for the 2016 LIHEAP Performance Data Form Grantee Survey sections 1 through 4. We're going to talk today about completing this report. Leon is on the call, but he is currently muted, so we think he's away. If he comes on during the first few slides, we'll hand it back over to him, and we'll ask him to say a few words at the end as well. We're going to go over a few things today, and just like the household report, webinar that we did a few weeks ago, this is going to be something that will be a review for some of you, and for others it will be new. And so we're hoping to touch on things that are newly required, but also we're going to go over things that some of you have been doing for a while, and we encourage you to ask questions regardless of your experience with this form. We're going to start with an introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about where this form came from. We're going to talk about completing this form in OLDC, and we'll only briefly touch on some of those technical aspects, as many of you have recently done this for the household report. We'll talk about some things that are a little different for the Grantee Survey. We'll talk about sections 3, 4, and 5. Remember that this form is all about sources of funds, so the money coming into your state as well as how the money is being used in your state. So we'll talk about both sources and uses, but also we'll talk about some of the validation checks that we're going to be doing and the things that you should be thinking about as you finish your form. We'll talk about the reporting schedule, we'll highlight resources, and we'll take questions. And it looks like Leon's on. Leon, are you there? Well, he was. So we'll go ahead and keep going, and he can jump on at the end or in one of the question sections. So next slide. So the LIHEAP Performance Data Form is relatively new. For those of you who have been around a while, this is a combination of the Grantee Survey and the new LIHEAP Performance Measures. And so this was approved in November of 2014. There are 3 sections in the form: the Grantee Survey, the LIHEAP Performance Measures, and then optional LIHEAP Performance Measures. And so we'll be spending this webinar going over the Grantee Survey, and then we have another webinar scheduled in January to go over the other sections. Hi, Leon.
Hi. I'm sorry. I could hear you, but you couldn't hear me. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Would you like to do a little introduction?
Okay, a post-introduction. Hi, everybody. Thank you again for taking the time of your day to learn hopefully some interesting and new things for you and doing this next large data reporting collection effort through our office. The first one is the household report, which was due, I think, what did we say, December 16th. Sorry, we did not get an action transmittal out in time and the instructions, and this time the action transmittal and the instructions are available if you go to the forms section of our federal LIHEAP website and go down to Performance Data Form. You'll see the deadline is January 31st. You'll see the instructions, and you'll see the AT. If by chance you're using Chrome, I discovered, I couldn't see the instructions, but I could see the action transmittal, which has the instructions attached to them, so you could get to them that way. Just a little history. We've been collecting this kind of data from states since probably around 1974-75. Basically, it's taking a snapshot, the most recent snapshot of what was in the pot of money you had for LIHEAP and how you made decisions, or what decisions you made in spreading out that money in terms of where did you put that money in terms of obligated funds, and of course there's the unobligated fund feature of the program too. So I'll leave with that. Money in, money out, and it should, when you add and subtract, it should equal 0, and that's a good sign that you've done that piece of it correctly. So I'll stop at this point.
Thank you, Liam. So just so that everyone, I mentioned this on the prior slide, but it's worth saying again, both the LIHEAP Grantee Survey and the LIHEAP Performance Measures sections are required this year. So this is the first year that the LIHEAP Performance Measures are required. both sections must be completed by January 31st. As Leon mentioned, both the AT outlines that date and then there are instructions attached to that. This webinar will focus on the grantee survey, and on January 5th we'll be having another webinar to focus on the second section, which is the performance measures section of the data form. So we're going to talk a little bit about OLDC, and this is kind of the same review that we do in our webinars to give people a little bit of a reminder, a refresher on how to use this, especially since different people sometimes on your staff are taking care of these forms. So we do have a lot of information online already about accessing OLDC. This is a link to a webinar that goes over how to enter, how to set up a login, how to log in, and all the steps you need to take to get into OLDC and navigate and submit your reports. So I'd encourage you, especially if you're new to OLDC, to go in and look at this resource and become familiar with the website. OLDC is accessed through Grant Solutions, so many of you are hearing that name used interchangeably. Grant Solutions is kind of the gate to OLDC. That name changed recently. You can log into Grant Solutions using the link that we have here on the slide. Once you're logged in, you'll click OLDC in the top taskbar to access the OLDC homepage. And when you're going to be completing these reports, I mention this every time, it's really important to save. Unless you click save, your changes aren't updated or kept, so it's important to continually click it. This is true especially if you're doing this over a period of time, because the system will kick you out, and if you haven't saved, then your data is lost. So this is just an important reminder for anything you're working on, but especially in OLDC. In terms of getting assistance with logging in or using the system itself, not content of the report, but just the technical pieces of the system, we've listed both phone numbers and a help link here, and we encourage you to use them. So in order to get to the performance data form that we're talking about today, you're going to go into OLDC and you're going to select the performance data form, the LIHEAP PDF, and you'll see that at the bottom of the screen. We're picking on Kansas today. And so at step 3, you'll choose the performance data form. Next slide. When you get in there, you're going to see reporting periods, and so in this case, Kansas has initialized their report. You're going to select the reporting period, and then you're going to select New Edit Revise Report. If for some reason your 2016 report form is not available for editing, it's important to contact your OCS liaison so that they can fix that. It's split into 3 modules. We've talked about this already, the performance data form. You have the Grantee Survey module, which is what we're talking about today, the performance measures module, which is the LIHEAP performance measures and optional. So you can see that on the screen here. And we're going to focus on the Grantee Survey first. So you can go through and do this in pieces, which is actually pretty nice. And so for today, you would go to the Grantee Survey. And when you get there, you're going to go ahead and click Edit Section and Go. And so when you do this, it's going to go ahead and initialize the report for you. This is what the screen should look like. If it doesn't, you haven't done it right. And once again, the action initializes the form, and it's now available for editing. And you'll notice the last sentence is fill out, save, validate, certify, and submit the form. So this is the body of work you're going to be doing with this. And you'll see all the steps laid out here. And then we have a few slides also. In the next few slides, we'll show you the process you use to go through this cycle. This is a nice summary. I think I mentioned this in the household report, although this one's a little different, but this slide in particular is a nice one to have out because it helps you remember all of the steps where you're going to navigate to begin, the things you're going to click, what you need to do to save and validate, certify, and submit your forms. And so this is a nice overview of the steps of the process you need to take or be prepared to take as you're getting ready to fill out this form. next slide. So once your form is submitted and you've gotten rid of all the fatal errors, which we'll talk about in the last section, it's checked by APPRISE and by your OCS liaison. So APPRISE will go through and will identify any reporting issues requiring revision. So in some cases you're going to get warnings that let you through, and we're going to talk about those, but also there may be things that APPRISE notices that need to be checked or confirmed, and we'll ask you to go in and revise those. And then once we've seen that they're revised, we will send them on to OCS, or let OCS know that they're ready and finished. To go in and revise and resubmit, there are some steps to take. So I think that's on the next slide. Oh, this is the handy form. So this is what I was telling you all about earlier, and we've seen this in multiple other webinars, but it's handy because it's a good reminder of the steps you need to take. I think more important than even going forward is when you need to edit. Editing requires unsubmitting, uncertifying, unvalidating. So you're actually you're not unvalidating. You're going to go through these steps again, up and on your way back. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. In order to access a submitted report for editing, you'll need to go ahead and select, just kind of like you did when you initialize, select the period that you want to edit, and then you're going to go in and click View Print Status Approve Report and click Enter. And when you do that, you're going to have an option to unsubmit your report. So you'll see that you can do multiple things from this page. You can look at printing, you can view your original report, you can review revisions. In order to revise and resubmit, you're going to click Unsubmit Report, you're going to click Edit Original, and you're going to click Uncertify. And once again, this walks through those steps that that we saw on the previous slide in terms of going backwards the same way that you submitted the form. This is, once again, a summary for those of you who like texts and lists. This is a great list for people who want to revise or resubmit. These are the steps that you would want to take. And I think we'll see this slide one more time and go on to the next one. During the completion, this is something a little different from the household report. During the completion of your performance data form, you may want to reference data from your 2015 LIHEAP Performance Data Form, or you might want to print off a copy to have next to you for reference. And so in the next few slides, we've walked through how to do that. You'll want to go in and select for the 2015 reporting period. Once again, you're going to click that View Print Status Approve Report and click Enter. And when you do that, you'll see that screen come up where you can do a number of things, but all you need to do to go back and print is on the very right-hand side, you'll see Print as PDF, and you can click Go. Or you can go view different versions of the report. So some of you may want to see the steps that your office took last year in terms of the revisions that were made. Maybe you're new and you want to understand why they made particular revisions. Some of you just might want to go to the most recent copy to have as a comparison, but this lets you do both of those things. So we're going to stop and ask if anyone has questions about referencing or getting into their reports in OLDC. For those of you who are new to these webinars, this is a help screen in order to learn how to ask a question. You can raise your hand and be called on. You can also type in a question. For those of you who don't want to speak or just want to type in your question, you can do that. If you do want to call in and ask, or if you do want to talk, you have to be on your phone, and you also have to have entered your audio PIN. And you'll see that in the pink bar. It says if you're already on the call, press pound, number, pound, and so you'll need to see what that is and enter that if you want to talk. And I'll let Michelle take it from here.
Okay, right now it looks like there's no questions, so I think we can move on.
Okay. We'll have 2 or 3 more chances for questions, so if you think of them, you can feel free to ask at any point. So remember that this form, we use a lot of terms. There's a lot of lines. We're going to talk a lot about how things should compare to other reports, but at the end of the day, the Grantee Survey portion of this report is all about exactly what Leon said. How much money was the state allocated for LIHEAP, or did they have to obligate in 2016? And then how much did they obligate and where did they put it? And so in many ways this is about giving us an overview of your checkbook. And so we're going to look specifically at some of the things that are important for you to consider as you're moving through the sources portion of this fund, this report. So sources being, this is the money you have available to spend. We're going to talk about pre-populated data fields. We're going to talk about some of the common issues we see every year with this area of the form. And we're going to talk a lot today in all sections about carryover, because this seems to be a very common issue, and we want to make sure that you're thinking about it as you prepare to complete this report. Next slide. Thank you. The LIHEAP Grantee Survey section of the form will be already populated with estimated sources of funds except the oil overcharge funds. So when you go to fill out this report, you should be seeing money amounts just similar to what you're seeing here in your report. Can you go to the next slide? Oil overcharge and carryover funds are available for editing. There are a couple of things we want to point out. First of all, the carryover amount that is pre-populated should reflect the carryover amount you reported in your grantee, your 2015 grantee survey. If you believe it's wrong, you need to talk to APPRISE, and we'll talk about the carryover throughout this webinar, so you're going to hear a lot about that. If you think that any other source values are incorrect, you should be contacting your OCS liaison or APPRISE. So honestly, when you open up this form, this is the first thing you should be paying attention to. Are the values that OCS has used to populate this form, are they aligned with what you expected to see there? If they are not, that is reason for a call to your OCS liaison or APPRISE, because trying to fill out the rest of the form if these values are wrong is not useful. The other piece we want to mention is that some of you went in and initialized your forms prior to these data fields being populated. APPRISE sent out emails, I believe very recently, to those grantees asking them to go in and delete and reinitialize their forms. So if you have questions about that, please let us know and we'll help walk you through that process or address any concerns that you have. So I mentioned we're going to talk a lot about carryover, and this is where it starts. So prior to completing the LIHEAP Grantee Survey, we really recommend that you all go out and review your 2015 and 2016 carryover and reallotment reports. We talked about this at the regional trainings last year, that all of these reports are connected. And so, you know, if the grantee survey portion of this report is looking at funds coming in and funds going out, then the places you're reporting those funds coming in going out need to match in other places. So for example, in 2015, if you said you were carrying money into 2016, it needs to match up. And if you're carrying money out of 2016 and into 2017, it needs to match up. So we recommend that you go out and you true up those carryover and reallotment reports before you get started on your grantee survey. It will also prevent follow-up from us. So we do have some common issues that we see with estimated sources of funds, and just some kind of recommendations to make. If you didn't draw down all your available LIHEAP funds, we recommend that you put this in the estimated uses of LIHEAP funds and the notes section. So we would expect to see that even though you had funds available, you didn't draw them down. We would expect that to show up both in the numbers and in the notes. The grantee returned LIHEAP federal funds to the government. Once again, this is something we would want to see in the numbers and the notes. We want to understand where funds were returned, and we want to understand when and how much. So all of that should be in the numbers in the notes. This gets into carryover from 2015. So this is where we're going to start talking about how all these reports link up. There's a link in every report, and this is talking about the 2015 Grantee Survey and the 2016 Grantee Survey. And so in 2015, we would expect that line 7, which says unobligated funds carried over into the next fiscal year, should then match the incoming carryover funds. So if I carried over $2,000, I'm just making up an amount, $2,000 from 2015 as a use of funds, I would expect that same $2,000 to show up as a source of funds in 2016. It's just like carrying money over in your checking account from one month to the other. You're going to want to see an accounting of that. On the next slide, you're going to see where other things need to match up. So the carryover and reallotment report should also match your sources of funds. If you said in August that you were going to carry over $2,000 from FY 2015 into FY 2016, we would expect those numbers to match. So you'll notice the highlighted box on the left. If that says 2,000, I would expect to see it as a source of funds, the same amount in line 6 of the sources of funds section. I think this is a phenomenal slide. It gives you a really nice idea. You should have amounts that equal one another in the 2015 carryover and reallotment report and the uses of funds. Both should say we're carrying money from 2015 into 2016, and that's going to show up in your sources of funds in 2016. Carryover should be about obligated funds, and you hear this a lot, but it's worth reiterating. We're not talking about unspent money. We're talking about unobligated money. And so when we talk about carryover from 2015, we're talking about things that have not been obligated. We're not talking about expenditures. Are there questions about the sources of funds? You'll notice we spent a lot of time on carryover. That's really been one of the biggest issues we've had in the past. So if there are other questions or other things people have run into, we'd like to hear about it.
Right now, again, it doesn't look like there are any questions.
Okay.
I think we can move on.
All right. So now we're going to talk about uses. This is where you obligated money. And so we talked already about sources, where the money came from and how much you had, and now we're going to talk about uses, how much you obligated and where you obligated it. We're going to talk about just some key items here. We're going to talk about nominal benefits, since that's been kind of updated over the last few years and changed back, and we're going to make sure people are very clear about that. We're going to talk about obligation of funds in question 1 of the form. We're going to talk about average benefit reporting, average benefit calculation, and a newly required piece of this form, which is average benefit by main heating fuel. We'll talk about some common issues, and once again, we're going to hit on that carryover issue. So the next slide talks about nominal payments. Remember that we're talking about nominal payments being defined as LIHEAP benefits received by SNAP households, such as Heat and Eat or Cool and Eat programs. These would have been reported on your household report in the nominal benefits section. And here's a chance to tell us how much you actually paid. And so grantees should report the total amount of funds obligated to nominal payments only in this line, and that's line 6. You'll see it highlighted at the bottom of the screen. These funds should not be counted in any other section of the report. So that's just something important to remember. They're not going to be tied into heating or cooling or crisis. They're not going to be tied into looking at your average annual total LIHEAP benefit per household. These are held out separately, all in line 6. Item number 2, you'll notice 2 questions with drop-down boxes. These are questions that help us understand what's on your form. The first question is about obligation of funds. So these are funds that you have obligated but they haven't been spent. So we're asking you to report yes or no. Were there obligated funds for a given type of assistance for households that won't even be served until the following year? And we see this a lot in weatherization. We see it even with some cooling assistance. Well, no, never mind, forget that. But we see it with folks who obligate money and don't spend it till the following year. So we would just want a yes or no in that field. Average benefit reporting. So this gets at what the average household benefit is for each type of LIHEAP benefit. Sometimes we notice that calculated average benefits aren't a direct calculation. So many of you will take the amount of money you spend, divide it by the household served, and it's very clear where you got the calculation. Other times we'll get see average benefits that don't mathematically jive. So this is a chance for you to tell us when an average household benefit includes funds obligated for benefits other than bill payment assistance. And what we'd like you to, like to see is you include a description of these benefit types in the notes section. So we know some of you have programs where you're giving benefits other than money, and this is a chance for you to tell us when that average benefit includes those kinds of services. Similarly, we're going to ask you in question 2 if your average household benefits are estimated due to unique program operation. So once again, this is a yes/no question. And so we know once again that there are sometimes difficulties computing an average because of a unique program component or the way that you offer your program or the way that you calculate average benefits. And so this is a chance for us to say that they're estimates or that you're using a different kind of calculation. And if we see that this is clicked yes, I just want to recommend that you put a note in the note box. Special cases should be described there, and you will get a call from APPRISE if we see a yes there, but we can't understand what that particular, the method you use to calculate or what you might be capturing in that average benefit. APPRISE staff will be calling you to find out. So if you answer yes in either of these questions, I would just recommend that you automatically put a note in the notes section to explain that answer. So this is a new measure this year. It was on the form last year, I believe, but it's required this year. So this is something you're all going to be looking at. This is about bill payment assisted average annual total LIHEAP benefit per household. So we're starting to get into those linkages again where we're looking at things across sections of forms and across forms. And so item 5 here is going to be also, I have this written down somewhere. Item 5 is also going to be the answer to item 3 in the next section. So you're going to see some of the same answers begin to cross sections of this form. And we'll highlight that in the January 5th webinar as well. But what we're looking at here is the average annual total LIHEAP benefit per household. This includes heating, cooling, crisis, and supplemental assistance. And we're looking for this only for people who have bill data for the 12-month reporting period. So many of you reported on bill payment assisted households in your household report. This is taking it a step further and saying we want to see an average benefit for those households, but we only want the average benefit for people who have that 12 months of main heating, fuel, and electric data. And this begins to cross over into thinking about performance management. Many of you, that's familiar to many of you because we've talked about it a lot in the performance measures. This data, once again, we mentioned is also reported in section 5 of the LIHEAP Performance Data Form in question 3. So you're going to be repeating this answer in that section. We can help people with this, so I we're going to hit it at the end that APPRISE is available, but anytime you have one of these new measures, sometimes it's helpful to talk through exactly what data you might be querying out of your system, or you need to talk to your IT folks about it, and we're willing to help with that. This is highlighted here, what we just talked about. It's spelled out right on the form. So all households with 12 consecutive months of bill data, and we're going to want to look at average annual total LIHEAP benefit per household. This includes heating, cooling, crisis, and supplemental. It does not include nominal payments, weatherization, equipment repair and replacement. So we're talking about bill payment assistance only. So some of the common issues that we see when we're going through this uses of funds, one of the things that you're asked to report is the maximum annual dollar income for a 4-person household. So this is your income eligibility threshold. And sometimes we see that they're inconsistent with the federal poverty guidelines or state median income guidelines. And so one of the first things that APPRISE will check for, and we'll talk about this again, is that we want to see the amounts and that maximum dollar income reflect the 2015 HHS poverty guidelines or the 2016 state median income guidelines. It is important to note if a grantee, some of you don't begin particular program components until after new poverty guidelines have been put out. So for example, some of you start cooling well after the new guidelines are published, and you use the new guidelines for your cooling program. And so in those situations, a grantee you may use the 2016 guidelines in the grantee survey reporting. And we encourage you to write a note. So especially if different program components are using different income eligibility requirements. So we would encourage you to note that if you change mid-year or decide to use a different set of guidelines in the middle of the year. Once again, we're getting into carryover. So when we talk about the carryover and reallotment reports needing to match the grantee survey sections, this is a great example of this picture here. In August, you all filled out a 2016 carryover report, and in this case, the state said, we are taking $617,000 of unobligated funds, not unspent, unobligated funds, and we're carrying it over into 2016. And so what we would expect to see is that the same amount that's in your carryover report is also in your uses of funds. So this is what we want to see these things match. If you say that you are going to take money out of 2016 in your carryover report, we also want to see that you're taking it out of 2016 in your grantee survey. And so these things should match. And that's why we mentioned it's so important to go in before you start your grantee survey and make sure that those carryover and reallotment reports, both the one you just submitted and the one you submitted the year before, are updated and trued up. Once again, here's a great graph that shows that what we see in the 2016 carryover and reallotment report should match what we see in your 2016 uses of funds section. So this is the uses of funds piece. I just want to highlight, while Michelle goes to the next slide, this is, we've put a lot of texts on each slide. Some of you are visual learners, and it's going to be helpful to have these slides next to you as you're kind of going in and doing the work. It's hard for some people to, as we're talking through this without seeing it, to understand it, but we encourage you to keep this alongside of you and to call us as you have questions as you're moving through the form yourself.
Okay, great. And we do have one typed in question, so I'm going to read it out. It reads, it's Casey Latran from Oklahoma. My question is about the bill average. We have a lot of issues dealing with vendors where the account changes due to service was either disconnected or a new account established or system upgraded. How would our vendor report the average billing in these circumstances?
So we'll cover this again in the performance data form, and David, you can step in if I'm mischaracterize this, but those are households where if the account number's changed and it's difficult to track the household, many vendors will just say they don't have 12 good months of data for that household, in which case they wouldn't be included in the performance measures, and they also wouldn't be included in line 5 of this report that we just covered. So there are some vendors that are willing to track a person through 12 months regardless of account changes, but many vendors have just made agreements with grantees that that's not something they'll include in their data exchanges. David, do you have anything more to add to that?
No, that is correct.
Okay, and we also have another question from Andrea Gregg to confirm if start a federal fiscal year using federal poverty lines for 2016 and you change mid-year, we include values for the federal poverty guidelines 2016 in the survey and include a note that we changed mid-year.
That's correct.
Great. And to the question of will the slides be made available, yes, they will be made available. All right, and I think there's one more question. Are we matching the August carryover and reallotment report or the December carryover and reallotment report?
You're going to match whatever your most recent carryover and reallotment report is. You originally had to submit it in August. Many people resubmit in December once they've trued up their done all of their reconciliations and reporting. So you're going to use whatever you have most recently reported for your carryover and reallotment, whatever's most accurate. Which is why we say go back in. So some of you may actually go back in, at the end of December and update it, or at the beginning of January, and those are the numbers you want to make sure they all match up across all your reports.
Great. And we also just wanted to note that the slides were sent out with the reminder email about the webinar yesterday. The slides will be posted, but please feel free to contact us if you did not yet receive a copy of the slides. And we do have a call-in question from Kathy Kinch. Kathy, I'm going to unmute you. You should be unmuted now.
Thank you. So my question was sort of answered in the previous one, but I'll do a follow-up question. So I'm getting ready to update our federal fiscal year 2016 carryover report, and I just want to be sure, and I have some questions about doing that I need to check with our federal liaison about as it relates to accounting for benefit refunds. But my question is, I'm assuming that we need to make sure that we update that report and that it actually gets approved by our federal liaison before we do submit the grantee survey. Is that correct? It's not only just us filing it, submitting it, and certifying it, but it's also our federal liaison would need to approve that new carryover report before we submit the grantee survey.
David?
So, no. You should file your carryover report. You should file your carryover report. Then you should go ahead and file your grantee survey. The only situation in which you might want to check in with your liaison is if the calculation shows that your carryover is now greater than the allowable 10%, and that you have to return funds. If that were the case, then you certainly should be consulting with your liaison before you start working on your grantee survey. But other than that, you go ahead.
So that will not be the case. We will not be over the 10%. But so it's not necessary that the federal liaison accept or approve the carryover report in OLDC before we file the grantee survey, is what you're saying.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's worth reminding everyone that those pre-populated fields, the only two that you can change are the carryover and the oil overcharge funds. So, Kathy, in your example, if you go in and change it, you also can go in and change it in the sources of funds. So you don't have to wait for someone to go in and repopulate that. You can do that yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to mute you again. All right. So I think for now, those are all the questions that we have.
Okay, great. So the next section, we're going to talk about validations. And the reason we talk about this is we want you, number one, to be aware of why that annoying box in red type is showing up when you go to validate and certify your report. But more importantly, this is a chance for you to be thinking about the kinds of things that could pop up as you're completing the report. So making sure that you're thinking about this as you're pulling data from your systems or getting information from your fiscal staff, whatever you might be doing to prepare for this, that you're thinking about these things in advance. And so the current validations that we're going to talk about are, we've talked about this a lot in every section already with the comparison of carryover reports to the LIHEAP Grantee Survey, but we're also looking at comparing your household report to the Grantee Survey. We're going to look at your previous year's Grantee Survey and compare it to this year's. And the big one, which is what Leon hit on at the very beginning of this presentation, is the, are we finding balance between the sources of funds and your uses of funds? That's really what this form is all about. So that's the big one. There are also manual validations done by APPRISE, and so we'll talk about both of those as well. So on the next slide, the first thing we want to remind everyone is that there are two kinds of validation errors that you're going to run across. The first are fatal error messages, and this is when you're running into data that will not let you move forward. So if you want to submit your report or certify it, you're not going to be able to do so unless you fix these fatal errors. That's why they're called fatal. The warning messages indicate that data may be correct but requires confirmation, either through additional explanation in the notes field or that we just want you to double check it because we think that there's potential for error. And as we always say in these webinars, notes will prevent follow-up contact. So if we go in and look at your data after you submit it and we see potential inconsistencies, we're going to call you to talk about it unless we see a note that explains it in the form. We're going to talk about some of these validations. The first is carryover report comparison. We've talked about this a lot already, but what you're going to want to see is that we want to see that the amount of money you reported in your sources of funds matches the carryover amount you reported in your carryover and reallotment report. And on the other end, if we see that you are carrying money into 2017 in your grantee survey, we also want to see that reflected in your carryover report. So once again, this gets at Kathy's question, making sure all of your carryover and reallotment reports are trued up and that those numbers should match both the sources and uses reported in your grantee survey. If those reports don't match, OLDC will issue a warning. And so we have an example on the next slide. In this first example, you'll see that this particular grantee reported that they carried over $3.3 million into 2016, but when you look at the sources of funds, it's saying that they only brought in $1 million. So there's obviously a $2.3 million difference there, and that is going to kick up a warning to make sure that those are aligned. Either you need to be fixing the carryover reallotment report to say $1 million, or fixing the grantee sources, the sources of funds in the grantee survey to reflect the 3.3. So, on the other end, once again, if you say that you're going to carry $500,000 from the 2016 into 2017, we want to see that reflected in your 2016 carryover and reallotment report, and this is another example where that doesn't match. So this just goes back and underscores the importance of truing up those carryover and reallotment reports. We're also going to look at a household report comparison. So in your household report, the way that I always thought of this when I was a state grantee is that the household report is talking about the people and the grantee survey is talking about the money. And so if you're serving people, we should expect to see that you spent money on them. If you say you're spending money on people, then we would expect those people to be reported in the household report. And so that's what these validations are checking. If we see that you've obligated funds for particular assistance, we should see households associated with that spending or obligation, forgive me. And then if a state assists households, so if we see that you assisted 500 households with cooling, we're going to want to see that you've obligated funds for those households. And so if they don't match, OLDC will once again issue a warning. So here's an example. On the next slide, in the household report, it mentioned this particular grantee said that they had no cooling households, but we see that $506,000 was obligated toward cooling, and so it's going to kick up a warning and it's going to ask you to explain that discrepancy. We're going to be looking, just like the household report when we looked year over year now, we're going to be looking at the year over year comparison of your grantee survey as well. Once again, these are warnings because we understand that there are situations where potential discrepancies aren't discrepancies at all. And so we encourage whenever there's a warning that you put in a note so that we can understand why situations are the way they are. So if a state obligates funds for given assistance in 2015, we just kind of expect that the same obligation or the same programs will be offered the following year, and so we would expect to see an amount in that field for the following year. And then the same thing backwards, right? If you say you have something, spent money in cooling but didn't have any cooling last year, it's going to kick up a warning just to say, are you sure? Did you mean to enter it in this field, or did you maybe miss a field? And so if you want to go to the next slide, there's an example of this. In 2015, this particular grantee did not report winter crisis, but all of a sudden there's $9 million in the 2016 grantee survey. It's not even if it's that extreme. If it goes from 0 to something, the validation will kick out a warning to say, did you mean to put something in this field because we didn't see it last year, and vice versa. And then this is the kind of mother of all validations, right? Do your total sources of funds equal your total uses of funds? And there are situations where this is not the case, and we'll definitely be following up with those, but really those are very rare. So your sources of funds should equal your uses of funds, and if they don't match, OLDC will issue a warning. Here's an example on the next slide. It says that you should have had $3.8 million to obligate, but we see, well, it's still 3.81, but we see that there's less money obligated than what you've had, which means there's that extra money is sitting somewhere. It might have been returned to federal government. It might have not been drawn down. But what it's going to do is kick this back and say, why don't these two things equal? And if you don't have a note in the notes section, APPRISE will follow up on that. APPRISE also does some manual validations outside of OLDC. So we're going to be checking the income threshold, which is Andrea mentioned. If we change mid-year and we put a note, that's going to prevent APPRISE from giving you a call to clarify why the income thresholds or requirements don't match what you're using as your maximum annual dollar income for households of 4. So we check that out, and we will follow up with states if we don't see a note in the notes section. We also compare your state plan with your grantee survey. So if a state reports that they're going to provide a particular kind of assistance or program component, we expect to see funds obligated in that area. And if the state obligates funds, and we see in your grantee survey that you've obligated $500,000 for cooling, but we don't see it in your state plan, either of those are going to kick off it's going to cue us to give you a call and find out what's going on. And so In the next slide, there's an example of this where in the model plan, this particular grantee has said we will be offering cooling assistance and here are the dates, but when we go to the grantee survey, we see that there are no cooling assistance benefits. So we talked about this during regional training a lot. For multiple reasons, some of the things we plan to do with our money don't always pan out. So there are states who will plan to have a cooling program, but for whatever reason, an emergency during the winter, less funding than they anticipated, they may cut or alter their cooling program. And so this isn't an unreasonable discrepancy in that it shouldn't be this way, but it shouldn't be a discrepancy because either you should be going back to amend your state plan to more accurately reflect your, what your reporting is spending, or you should be updating your grantee survey to be correct. But these two should match, and much like the carryover report, people should be going into their state plan and updating it to reflect, more accurately reflect what they're doing on the ground.
And Melissa, to anticipate that question, and there are certain kinds of, they do not need that an approval for that from their liaison, for those changes.
I expect we'll have questions in this section. Let me anticipate a question that we got during the regional training, and we actually just talked about the other day. You don't need approval from your liaison to go in and change your state plan. However, we talked about this a lot, that there are some cases where a significant change may trigger the need to have a public hearing. We would recommend that if you believe that the change you're making is significant, and you have not, written language in your state plan that says, any unspent funds will be redirected to this program, or, some language in your state plan that allows you to redirect money, that you should call your liaison and just talk through whether or not it warrants a public hearing. So I want to clarify that.
And it looks like we have a call-in question from Kathy. So Kathy, I'm going to unmute you now. You should be unmuted.
So I assume I'm the Kathy from Maine, but I don't have a question, so I don't know why it's still showing one.
Okay, sorry about that.
So if it wasn't clear what people are thinking of their questions, we said this at the regional training, and I think it's worth reiterating. Every single report you submit is linked. And in the past, and even in where, when I was a grantee, certain people in different departments would fill out certain reports. So remember we talked about the household report being about households, and so the LIHEAP director or the IT staff may help with that, and the grantee report is more fiscally centered, and so you may have fiscal staff doing that, and it's very real chances there that folks aren't comparing the reports. And so this is really, all of these validations are put in place with the expectation that you're looking at those numbers across, you're updating as they change on the ground, both your state plan, your carryover and reallotment. And so all of it should be linking together if you're regularly truing those up.
Okay, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions, Melissa, so unless you have anything to add,
nope, we'll go on to the end. So this just goes over some reporting deadlines and resources. The final household report data for 2016 was due December 16th, unless you had an extension. If you did not turn it in and you did not have an extension, I would suggest calling your OCS liaison and talking with them. The 2016 LIHEAP Performance Data Form, both the Grantee Survey section we talked about today and the Performance Measure section we're going to talk about on January 5th, both of those are due into OLDC by January 31st. Once again, if you don't think you can make that timeline, please talk with your OCS liaison. The 2016 performance measure data portion is mandatory this year, so this will be the first year it is required, and once again on January 5th we'll be talking about that section of the report. In the meantime, though, even if you're working on it, many of you are going to start working on it over the holidays, or maybe everybody's going to be leaving the office and it's a perfect chance to sit down and work on it, or maybe you want to get some of it out of the way before you take your vacations, whatever. Please don't hesitate to call and reach out if you need assistance with any portion of your LIHEAP reporting, whether it be the carryover and reallotment, your household report, or your grantee survey, either section. Please reach out, and we've put all the help resources here, the OCS liaisons, as well as the APPRISE team, and just know that if you contact APPRISE, we will loop in your liaisons in. So the Grant Centers of Excellence, this is what we talked about at the very beginning of this webinar. This is for help getting into OLDC. If you do have someone else who's going to be helping you with this report that didn't help on the household report, make sure they log in and get their login credentials in advance of January 31st. I know some people wait to the last minute, and if they try to go in and log in and enter their data, they may not have a login, and it may put them behind the ball. So I encourage you to go in early and log in. And I think that is the end, so we'll take any questions anyone has.
Doesn't look like there are any additional questions right now, Melissa.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you taking the time today for this webinar, and as always, if you have questions that come up as you're thinking about this, please don't hesitate to email or call us, and we'll, if we can't help you, we'll get you in touch with the right person. Hope you all have a great day and a great week. Take care.